Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bob Unger Show. We're very privileged to have as our guest, very interesting rabbi who I learned about through a friend of mine, Joan Swirsky, who had sent me an article that Rabbi Carrie Kosberg had written. And the article was kind of a little bit based on what Ronald Reagan had said when he said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me." And Rabbi Kosberg's article was called "The Reformed Left Me," because Rabbi Kosberg, I believe you were ordained as a Reform rabbi, correct?
Correct.
From a Reform seminary?
Correct.
And obviously you began to get very disillusioned with a lot of the ideology that they're pushing. So let's go into the background a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself as a young man. Not to say that you're an old man, but I'm I'm 68, and there was a time when I was younger. So tell us a little bit about your formative years and where this puts you in terms of your ideology and outlook on life. And then we'll go into any kind of metamorphosis you may have had over time.
I was the product of what I would call an intra-Jewish mixed marriage. My dad was raised Orthodox. His parents were immigrants from Russia. My mother was about a third generation German Jew, raised in a very assimilated home, had almost no Jewish education. The compromise between the two of them was to join a conservative synagogue. I was raised in Houston, Texas. I would say that we were passive conservative. That is, we didn't keep kosher. We really didn't keep Shabbat, but I was out of school for 2 days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. We fasted, always had two Seders, kept Passover in the home. I looked forward to my bar mitzvah, and I liked Hebrew school, but chose not to continue my education after bar mitzvah in any significant way. Was a member of a Jewish youth group, and as I described in the article, Judaism was more of a hobby that I enjoyed doing when I wanted to do it, but it really wasn't the life commitment that it would become. When I was in college, I was on a pre-med course. Throughout my childhood, I always wanted to go into medicine of some sort, and planned to enroll in the medical school at the University of Texas. To get into med school, obviously you had to have a high grade point. So I took courses that would help me achieve that, and one of them was a course called The History of the Jews in Spain. I took the course because it was known to be very easy. You come to class, you write a paper, it's a guaranteed A. The instructor was very, very accommodating. I decided to write a paper about Maimonides, and I knew very little about Maimonides except that he was a rabbi and a doctor. So as I was doing research, I started reading some of his philosophy. And it was the late 60s, early 70s. A lot was going on in the country. People were asking questions about society, about themselves, and I happened to be one of them. And what I read really resonated with me. And I went to talk to my rabbi during spring break of that year, and he encouraged me to enroll in a summer course in New York, which I did. And I came home from that course very much a committed Jew, rediscovering my roots and my tradition, and really putting my life on a different course. I had planned to enroll in the conservative seminary. At that time, it was very hard to get in. You had to know a lot of Talmud, which I, growing up in Houston, didn't have. but initially planned to take a preparatory course after college. And my last year of college, a recruiter from HUC came to Austin, and I interviewed with him. I actually just had a discussion with him because I was curious. And he basically succeeded in recruiting me and assured me that my level of observance would not be a hindrance at the Reform Seminary, because he said a lot of students now were re-engaging with Jewish tradition. And he said the first year of rabbinical school was in Israel, where I would really be able to improve my Hebrew skills. And that really is what sealed the deal for me. So I enrolled at HUC, was there for 5 years. He told the truth. My level of observance was never a problem. My first pulpit out of HUC was a congregation that was classical reform. I made accommodations. They made accommodations. My job after that, my second position was in a conservative congregation. And then I left the congregational rabbinate to be Hill director and a healthcare chaplain. But in the last several years, it's been very clear that the reform movement that I grew up with in seminary was not the reform movement of today, that it was no longer a big tent where people could be Jewish the way they needed to be Jewish. You had to really subscribe now to a certain orthodoxy of a political orthodoxy. If you were not a progressive, a political progressive, on down the line, if you didn't really support what the political agenda was among progressives, you were not considered to be a good Reformed Jew. And I have colleagues who have been canceled. I took the initiative of leaving the movement myself, okay, because I knew I wasn't going to, where it was going, I wasn't going to fit in. And I no longer fit in. I resigned from the Reform Rabbinic Association several years ago. Have been watching what's been happening sort of on the sidelines, talking to congregational members about what their own rabbis preach about. I think I made the right decision.
Well, you mentioned Maimonides, and of course, I've read Guide to the Perplexed, so I'm a little bit familiar with him. And he had his rules of what it takes to be a believing Jew.
Right.
And could you elucidate on that and contrast that with what today's reform movement believes compared to Maimonides?
Well, I would say that Reform Jews believe a lot of different things, okay? Reform Judaism teaches a lot of different things, okay? To my understanding, what Reform Judaism teaches pretty much does not align itself with what Maimonides taught. The truth is, from the beginning of the Reform movement, that's been the case. One example is, as folks may know, Maimonides taught that to be a believing Jew, one has to believe in resurrection of the dead, that at some point God will raise the dead from the grave for his purposes. That's a different discussion. Long ago, Reform Judaism said that we no longer believe that. Reform doesn't believe that the Torah is from God. Their understanding is that it is very much a human document inspired by God, and that really gives permission for the Torah to change as far as they're concerned. Some Reform Jews, some Reform rabbis don't believe in God as a commanding force. To my mind, that pretty much takes the heart and soul out of the belief system itself.
Now, when you were a practicing rabbi in a temple. And at that time, were you a secular humanist, or had you already begin to change away from that type of relativistic philosophy?
I really was never a secular humanist. I never understood it because secularism doesn't give any compelling reason to follow the commandments. I mean, I've taught classes where I've challenged my students and asking, if there's no God, why should people be moral? Why should people be good? How do we understand good and evil with a capital G and a capital E if there is no God? And the answer usually is, well, of course there's a good and of course there's an evil. And when I've challenged them on it, there's no answer. Okay. So my understanding is that people who don't believe in God yet believe in good and evil, or believe there is a good and an evil, they're really living on the fumes of what was once a very robust faith that most Jews believed. Okay. They don't believe in the source of the good and evil, but they still believe there's a difference between good and evil, that they obviously believe they have the permission to decide what's what. And that's where we get into moral relativism, which is a big problem today.
Many of them will say to me that it's decided by a consensus. And
and I would say that was the case in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, that's what I always tell them. And, the example I use, because I'm a very blunt person, is I'll say to them, do you think it's wrong for a man to have sex with a child? And they'll say, oh, of course not. And then I'll say, really? Well, what makes it wrong? Well, most people think it's wrong. So we can go back to that argument. Yeah, most people thought Hitler was right. And I say to them, if you think it's wrong and I think it's right, what makes me wrong? Because that's your opinion and I have mine. So they can't come to grips with the idea that without a moral arbiter, an objective source of truth, everything becomes a matter of opinion.
Absolutely. Dostoevsky supposedly wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, if there is no God, everything is permissible. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And if that's the case, everything is, and it really does become a matter of opinion.
When people came to you for guidance or counseling back in the day, and they would have a moral question or moral quandary of some kind, and they would say, Rabbi, what is the right thing to do? Would the Torah be your primary source for that answer?
Absolutely, absolutely. And many times, if not usually, the Torah was the source, but as you know, a lot of times hard moral questions have a lot of nuances. And that's the way our rabbinic sages always address these things. So for example, with the big push button issues today, abortion, homosexuality, gun control, etc., our society looks at things in either very black or very white issues, very white approaches. Judaism always has nuance and always wants to know what are the specifics, because we can only decide on not philosophically, abstractly, but on what the actual circumstances are. The Torah is not a book of philosophy or theology. The Torah is a book of narrative and laws, which tells us how we are supposed to behave and what we are supposed to do, not what we're supposed to think.
Well, Rabbi Kahana wrote a book. Meir Kahana was known for his advocacy of Jewish self-defense and for his activism, but he also theologically was a scholar. And
Right.
that was understood insufficiently because of his image. But he wrote a volume, actually it's 2 volumes, Jewish Idea. And in that 2-volume set, he explains every single aspect of Judaism, not from his vantage point, not from his opinion, but from Rashi, from Maimonides, and he gives you the classical ideas of Judaism, not just rituals of how to pick up breadcrumbs during Pesach, but the actual Jewish answers on every issue, whether it's death, it's hatred. You know, there's a temple that I pass by all the time when I go to visit my grandchild. And it's an alleged conservative temple. And they have a sign that says, there is no place for hate in this building. Well, that's a
That's not Jewish. That's not Jewish. That's not Jewish. I mean, and it's demonstrably not Jewish.
So
it's demonstrably not.
Explain.
Jewish.
Go ahead.
Well, you know, in the Psalms it says, "Those who love the Lord hate evil." Okay, so if there's no room for hate, how do you hate evil?
And then, of course, in the very famous rock and roll song, "Turn, Turn, Turn" by the Byrds, I believe.
There's a time for love and a time for hate. Absolutely.
That's right.
From
Time for
Ecclesiastes.
peace, time to kill. And when I hear them say that, and then I quote directly from the Bible, of course, the Bible is meaningless to them because they make up their own religion.
Correct.
Are you familiar with Rabbi, I may have asked you this on the phone, are you familiar with Rabbi Marvin Antelman?
No.
Okay.
I was not familiar until you told me about it.
Okay. Well, he has these 2 volumes called "To Eliminate the Opiate," and I refer to them all the time. And he documents, and this guy does some incredibly prodigious research. He documents that the Reformed and conservative movements from the beginning were deliberate attempts to destroy Judaism. And of course, it actually has had its effect, as we can see. But it was actually intended. And you see, this is the thing I think with a lot of people who kind of think like us. They don't want to believe that this is not incompetence. This is not stupidity. These people are not stupid. And they're not incompetent. I'm not talking about the rank and file people, you know, what Lenin referred to as the useful idiots. I'm talking about the big machas.
Right.
Like Jacob Frank, for example. They knew exactly what they were doing. Because when you think you are God, you don't like a religion that says that you're not God and that you don't get to decide
exactly
parameters. An entity far above you in every way decides, and it's for you to choose to either obey or disobey. And then I want to ask you, do you see a difference, because I do, between individual disobedience of Jewish commandments, and obviously a lot of people don't know there's a lot more than 10, the individual disobedience as opposed to going over to other people and trying to get them to join you in disobedience?
Very much so. Very much so. And it's a matter of attitude. I mean, there is no Jew alive that doesn't commit a transgression. The question is, what's the attitude? Now, a person who has to drive on Shabbat because they live far away from a shul, whatever the circumstances, it's hard. It's not possible for them to live close to a shul. They have to drive. Okay? They may not want to violate Shabbat in that way, but it's a necessity. They're not happy about it, but it is. Okay. That's very different than someone who says, I don't care. I don't care about doing Shabbat. It's meaningless to me. It's nonsense. Okay. I'm going to do what I want. And for those, leaders, Reform leaders who, when they're teaching classes, say, well, this is what Jewish tradition is taught, but we're Reformed Jews, we don't do that. That's an attitude problem. Now, the Reform movement that I grew up in, okay, I had teachers who said nothing in Jewish tradition should be foreign to an informed Reformed Jew, an informed Reformed Jew. Nothing should be foreign. Okay, everyone is going to choose whether or not to respond, incorporate certain things in their life. But when you say we don't do that because we're Reform, that's shoving it back in God's face. And there are going to be consequences to that. My belief, frankly, about Jewish life today, the Jewish community, particularly in America, it very much parallels the way the Jewish community was in Greco-Roman times, particularly in the Mediterranean diaspora. Those Jews were very much influenced by the host culture, like Jews in our country are. That culture in many ways was non-Jewish, un-Jewish, and eventually those Jews disappeared.
Yeah.
And my fear is that's what's going to happen to much of the Jewish community in this country unless they come back and start to re-embrace traditional beliefs and traditional values.
Well,
Reform is pretty much a religion of social justice now.
yeah. Or socialist injustice. When I go to shul, a lot of times I find the rabbis, and I'm talking about Orthodox shuls, they're afraid in many cases to tell the truth. For example, I have never heard even an Orthodox rabbi say that the holiday of Hanukkah commemorates a war between the religious Jews that adhered to the Torah versus not only the Greeks, but all the Reformed Jews of that day who sided
Correct.
with the Greeks against the Maccabees. I've never even heard a rabbi from an Orthodox shul say it because they don't want to be unpopular. What do you think?
And my question would be, do they even know where that story is told? In other words, if they don't read the book of the Maccabees, which is not part of our canon, and they only know the Talmudic story about the miracle of the oil, it's a good question. Why don't they tell the story? That's more important. That's a more important story. What Mattathias did and his decision to bring courage to his decision to kill the apostate Jew. That's really what started. If it hadn't been for, if he would have gone along to get along, we wouldn't be Jewish today. There'd be no Judaism.
That's right. Are you familiar with the Lubavitch or the Chabad movement?
I daven at Chabad every Shabbos morning.
I had a feeling. So what is your opinion of them? Because I went to a Chabad shul many times.
Well, let me tell you the story if I have time.
Go ahead.
My experience with Chabad up until about 6 years ago was one of distance. When I was a Hillel director, the Chabad on campus was fairly aggressive, and I didn't get a really good feeling of cooperation from them. When I moved here to Columbus, I kind of kept my distance. When I left my position as a chaplain under not great circumstances, the Chabad rabbi here in town was the only rabbi that called to see how I was doing. The only one. Now, he and I were not friendly. We were acquaintances at most, but he was the only rabbi that called to see how I was doing. And from then on, I became a disciple. I go to shul there. I'm the shomer, the guard at the door every week. And a very, he became not only my teacher, but my friend.
What's his name?
Chaim Kaplan, Rabbi Chaim
Yeah.
Kaplan.
Okay, I'll have to tell my friend Rabbi Wolf from Chabad over here, because I'm sure they know each other because they all know each other. Half of them are in some way.
Chabad gets, I'm sure you know, Chabad gets a very bad rap, both from their fellow Hasidic groups and from the non-Orthodox world. The truth is, when it comes to connecting with Jews who are on the fringes, there's nobody more successful.
Yeah.
There's nobody more successful.
It's funny. It's not funny. It's actually sad. I had a lawyer friend, and we were in court together. Because I'm a lawyer as well, but don't hold it against me. And a rabbi walked by, very well-known rabbi from Chabad, walked right by the court. And this friend of mine had serious cancer, and he was a Jew. So I thought I would do a mitzvah. And I called out to the rabbi, Rabbi Hecht, his name was. I said, Rabbi Hecht, how you doing? Could you do me a favor? My friend is ill. Could you please give him a blessing? And he said, of course. And, came right over. That's the way they are. My friend got so angry. He said, get away from me. Get away from me.
Really?
Yeah. Now, if I had said that regarding my Christian friends, they would have been so happy that the rabbi,
I know that,
to give them a blessing. But it's an amazing thing. And my theory always has been that very deep down, hidden, is tremendous guilt on their part when they see someone who actually is following Judaism.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, I need to change myself, they become very hostile to the person that's promulgating a Jewish philosophy.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a story several years ago. I gave when I was a nursing home chaplain, we had high holiday services for the community. And we had a lot of people who were not affiliated with synagogues attend. And I gave a sermon on Rosh Hashanah on how we Jews have to reconnect with God. Okay, we just can't be a culture, ethnic group. We really have to bring more religion and connect with God. Okay. Right after the holiday, I was asked to come into the administrator's office, and he said to me, Rabbi, what did you speak on Rosh Hashanah? I said, I spoke about God. Why? He said, well, there was someone there who didn't like your sermon. I said, what's not to like? I didn't say anything offensive. He said, he called and he said he was complaining because he didn't come to shul to hear about God. It's a true story. Bob, is a true story. He didn't come to hear about God on the high holidays. Okay. I said, I was incredulous. I said, what did he come to hear? What did he expect to hear? Well, I asked him that, and he said, I really thought he'd give a sermon about current events, about Israel, about what's going on in the world. He said, I was really offended that he talked about God. So it reminded me of that scene in Dr. Strangelove, where they're in the bunker, and George C. Scott's character, the general, starts fighting with the Russian ambassador. And Peter Sellers, who plays the president, says, gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Kind of like military intelligence.
Right. So, I mean, look where we've gone to when Jews, even in shul, don't want to hear about God.
Yeah, they'll probably like to hear about a good business deal. But in the remaining time, we only have about 5 minutes left. In view of all you're hearing on the news about guns and the Second Amendment, talk a little bit about what would have happened if the Jews in Europe were heavily armed, and why this issue is so important for Jews. And I know you are affiliated as a chaplain with a great organization called Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership. And tell us a little bit about the group and why it's so important for Jewish survival.
Well, Jews not only owning guns, but knowing how to responsibly, and I will underline that word, responsibly use firearms is becoming more essential today, as we're finding out. Jews in this country, kind of kvel and shep nachas from young Israelis, schlepping around M16s, even if they're in formal wear. Okay, but for some reason they get freaked out when we talk about Jews carrying firearms into synagogues to properly protect themselves. There's a real disconnect, and I see it as remnants of the galut diaspora mentality. It's pretty clear from our tradition that we have an obligation, not just a right, but an obligation to defend our lives, because, as you know, Judaism teaches our lives are not our own. We are given them in stewardship by God, and we have an obligation to protect them and make sure they stay as healthy as we can get them to be. To say automatically that guns are, shall we say, goyish and nachas, that's not true anymore, and it can't be true. And when we continue to do that, we do so at our own peril. If Jews would have been armed and would have not been so comfortable with being the eternal victim, history may very well have been different. We know that there were Jewish partisans, the Bilski brothers, and other groups that fought the Jews. And even on Yom HaShoah, we many times forget about that. In Israel, the name of the holiday is not just Yom HaShoah, it's Yom HaShoah Ugvura, the day of the Holocaust, but also the day of heroism. In this country, we tend to focus on the victims. We don't so much focus on the people who resisted the Nazis. And we in America have to reclaim that. We have to become more comfortable, because we're starting to face the same kinds of threats. The rabbi in Texas who let the terrorist in was doing so ostensibly out of altruistic reasons. He almost got himself and the congregation killed. Okay? This is a very emotional subject, but reason has to take over from emotion if anything is going to be done that is going to help us survive. And as we know, getting back to Mayor Kahana, to me, it's terribly ironic that the name of his book was Never Again. He is so hated by much of the Jewish community, and yet they have taken his slogan, Never Again, and used it for their own purposes. Now, many times for them, Never Again is a call to educate and be nice and promote kumbaya moments. That doesn't work. It's never worked. It's not going to work now. Those who want to hurt us and kill us very much mean to do so. And we have to be prepared for that. We just do.
If people want to read more about you or learn more about you or take a look at articles like the one I referred to, how can they do that?
They can Google my name. I've written several blogs in the Times of Israel that say more about about what I'm saying here, and that's probably the best way. Just to Google my name.
And where do you work out of now?
I'm working Columbus, Ohio. I'm semi-retired, doing a lot of training on my own time to improve my own firearm skills because I believe this is very, very serious. And if God forbid I have to use a weapon, I want to be able to use it responsibly and accurately.
Okay. Well, Rabbi, it was a pleasure to talk to you. And I'll talk to the Chabadniks over here and ask them about your Chabad, Rabbi. I'm sure they know each other. And hopefully at some point we can connect. And obviously, if you're ever in the New York area, you have an open invitation to get together with
I
me.
appreciate that.
And
Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, well, I think you have a lot of important things to say. You're a bright guy and you say what you think. And of course, I'm drinking violence. All right. Take care and God bless you.
Thank you.
Okay.